All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to dive right into one of the absolute most dramatic transformations in human history, the evolution of the Roman Empire. We're going to trace how Rome went from these wild, incredibly chaotic days, ruled by some seriously personality-driven emperors, to this highly structured golden age of peace, stability, and massive prosperity. It is just a fascinating story of political survival, mind-blowing engineering, and, as we'll see, the very harsh realities of everyday ancient life.
Okay, let's dive into this. And really, there's no better way to set the stage than with this brilliant observation from the ancient Roman historian Tacitus. You know, when we think about the Roman Empire today, we usually picture total, absolute control. But for your everyday Roman, even the elites, living under the early emperors was completely unpredictable. As Tacitus perfectly puts it here, the extravagance, the greed, the massive egos of these rulers, they are basically viewed as forces of nature. You couldn't control them. You just had to hunker down and endure them, just like a flood or a drought.
Section 1. Surviving the Early Emperors.
So, surviving these early rulers was definitely no small feat. Looking at our roadmap here, the drama really kicks off right after Augustus dies in 14 AD, when his reluctant stepson, Tiberius, takes over and starts the Julio Claudian dynasty. From there, we navigate through the absolute chaos of rulers like Caligula until we hit a major turning point in 69 AD. That's when Vespasian steps in and establishes the Flavian dynasty. Things finally start to stabilize, leading us into the era of the 5 good emperors in 96 AD, which wraps up with the death of the philosopher king Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD.
That early instability we just mentioned, it is perfectly summed up by Gaius, though you probably know him better as Caligula. Now, the name Caligula actually means baby boots. It was this ironic, kind of affectionate nickname given to him by the troops when he was just a little kid hanging around his dad's military camps. But despite growing up around the army, when he actually came to power, he had zero military leadership skills. None. Instead, he just completely gave in to the temptations of unbridled power. He bankrupted the treasury funding these violent, extravagant desires, and then, to make up for it, he imposed these crazy sales taxes on everything from fast food takeout shops to the services of prostitutes. He totally outraged the Roman elite, which, unsurprisingly, ended with his own guards assassinating him.
That exact same dangerous mix of absolute power and zero preparation later consumed Emperor Nero. Nero was totally unfit to run an empire. His real passions were acting and music. He literally drained the Roman treasury just to fund these spectacular public festivals and his own theatrical performances. Eventually, the elites and the provincial commanders just had enough of his fake treason charges and property seizures, and they sparked a massive rebellion. Backed into a corner with no defense left, Nero was forced to commit suicide, highly dramatically of course, famously crying out, "To die, and such a great artist."
Well, Nero's death threw Rome into a massive civil war, and the guy who came out on top was a general named Vespasian. Vespasian was a completely different breed, a pragmatic, hard-nosed military man who brought a very necessary dose of traditional Roman skepticism back to the top job. See, out in the eastern provinces, people had this habit of worshiping their rulers as living gods. Traditional Romans thought this was just a bizarre provincial quirk. Vespasian knew exactly how ridiculous it was. So with his classic dry wit, as he's lying on his deathbed dying of natural causes, he mutters, "Poor me, I'm afraid I'm becoming a god," just totally poking fun at the very imperial system he was in charge of.
Section 2. Funding the Roman machine.
So, the crucial point is, with all this assassination and civil war happening at the very top, how on earth did the actual empire keep running day to day? Well, one absolutely vital tool was the imperial cult. Now, this wasn't just about massaging the emperor's ego, it was a super effective administrative strategy. By having local provincial elites perform rituals and animal sacrifices for the welfare of the emperor, Rome built up this massive, far-reaching network of loyalty. The emperor was the ultimate patron, the local elites were his clients, and this bond is essentially what kept the distant provinces in check without having to station a massive occupying army everywhere.
Now, we have to remember this vast system of taxation and local governments wasn't just happening in fancy marble palaces in Rome. It was happening in dense, bustling towns. Looking at this street in Herculaneum, which was perfectly preserved by the ash of Mount Vesuvius back in 79 AD, really grounds us in the physical reality of the time. You can see these crowded, multi-story buildings with balconies where everyday people actually lived and worked. Keeping these densely packed urban centers prosperous, clean, and most importantly, taxed, required a really delicate touch from the government.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly Emperor Tiberius understood that delicate balancing act. When some of his provincial governors came to him asking to increase agricultural taxes to squeeze out more revenue, Tiberius just flat out refused. His response? I want you to shear my sheep, not skin them alive. It's brilliant, right? He knew that to make the empire last, you had to extract enough wealth to pay for the army and the bureaucracy, but you couldn't push the provinces so hard that they'd actually revolt.
So how did the mechanics of this actually work? Believe it or not, it relied heavily on a sense of civic duty. The local provincial elites, they were called curiales, actually acted as unpaid officials to collect these taxes. And here is the craziest part. If they didn't hit the yearly tax quota, they had to make up the shortfall out of their own pockets. The entire stability of the empire literally depended on these wealthy provincials deciding that the prestige of public service was worth more than their personal bank accounts. At the same time, you had army veterans settling down and spreading Roman culture, and his underlying peace allowed international trade to absolutely boom, reaching all the way to India and China.
Now, obviously, none of that peace or booming trade happens without the Roman army, but the army was doing a lot more than just fighting battles. Take a close look at the auxiliary soldiers carved into the victory column of Marcus Aurelius here. The military was this incredible cultural melting pot. A huge portion of the troops were non-citizens. We're talking archers and cavalry drawn from the absolute fringes of the empire. By serving under Roman commanders, they picked up Latin, they learned Roman customs, and when they finally retired, they were granted full Roman citizenship. So the army essentially acted as this massive engine for spreading a unified Roman way of life. Section 3. Building the Golden Age.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when all those pieces, the loyal army, the civic-minded elites, the careful taxation, finally come together in the 2nd century AD. Without the constant drain of civil wars, Rome could suddenly pour resources into monumental infrastructure projects that actually made life better. Look at this massive stone bridge in Gaul. It's carrying a gravity-fed aqueduct, delivering a nonstop flow of fresh water from miles away. Engineering marvels like this meant that almost everyone in a major Roman town, whether you were a wealthy senator or a poor laborer, had access to safe drinking water, public baths, and flushing toilets.
The emperors also poured wealth into massive, awe-inspiring architecture, basically using these projects to win public favor and loudly broadcast their success. You've got Emperor Hadrian building the Pantheon, which features this absolutely breathtaking, perfect half-sphere dome that spans almost 150 feet across. Before him, Emperor Trajan built a 130-foot solid stone victory column, literally a spiraling film strip made of stone detailing all his military wins. These weren't just pretty buildings. They were calculated, spectacular displays of power designed to legitimize the ruler to the masses.
Section 4. Law, Life, and Inequality.
But for all the gleaming marble and the relative peace of this golden age, we really need to take a sobering reality check about what everyday life was actually like. The Roman justice system was built on a foundation of intense, institutionalized inequality. Roman law literally split society into two camps: the worthy people, like your senators and elites, and the much, much larger group of humbler people. If you were a humbler person and committed a capital crime, you were looking at horrifying public executions, crucifixion, or being thrown to wild animals. But if a worthier person committed that exact same crime, they rarely faced death, and if they did, they were given a quick, dignified execution by the sword. And the Romans didn't see this as corrupt. To them, a person's high social status was proof of their actual human merit.
And beyond the sheer brutality of the legal system, just biologically surviving day to day was an uphill battle. Infant mortality was incredibly high, which meant families had to have a lot of children just to keep the population steady. Because of this, girls were routinely married off in their early teens to maximize their childbearing years. And if you got sick, ancient medicine was basically guesswork. Doctors had no concept of germs, they relied on plant potions and absolute placebos. I mean, they'd literally give injured chariot drivers a drink of wild boar's dung boiled in vinegar. Without antibiotics, childbirth was a massive risk, and there was also the tragic, but completely routine and culturally accepted practice of exposing, meaning abandoning, unwanted infants, especially girls.
Yet, even in the middle of all those incredibly harsh ancient realities, genuine human connection and love still thrived. We don't just see this in the history books, we see it carved into things like this simple gravestone for a woman named Aurelia Philematium. It was put up by her husband, who was just a local butcher. It reads, "I was chaste, modest, knowing nothing about the crowd, faithful to my husband, he was more than a parent to me." It's incredibly touching, right? It really humanizes all this historical data and reminds us that beneath the statistics about arranged marriages and brutal medicine, people still experience profound love, devotion, and grief, just like we do today.
Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought to leave you with. The Romans mastered complex law. They engineered aqueducts that are literally still standing today, and they brought a massive, diverse continent together under a totally unprecedented era of peace. But for all of that power and engineering, a simple infection or a difficult childbirth could end a life in an instant. If the mightiest empire in history, at the absolute peak of its golden age, couldn't protect its own citizens from the simple, everyday fragilities of human health, how truly stable is any civilization? It's a question that echoes out from those ancient marble ruins right into our world today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history around you.